The forest had always been my escape. Whenever life became too loud, I retreated to the quiet of the trees, their towering forms shielding me from the chaos of the world. That's why I was there that day, with no real destination in mind. Just walking, letting the crunch of leaves underfoot drown out my thoughts. Then I saw it. At first, it looked like nothing more than a patch of uneven ground, partially hidden beneath a layer of moss and roots. But as I got closer, I noticed the edge of a rusted metal hatch peeking out from the forest floor. My curiosity flared, and I crouched down, brushing away the debris. The hatch was old, its surface pitted with corrosion, but still intact. A thick handle jutted out, and engraved above it were the words, "Authorized personnel only." I hesitated. The words carried weight, a warning that made my skin prickle. But curiosity won out. Gripping the handle with both hands, I gave it a hard tug. It resisted at first, but then the hatch groaned open, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. A rush of stale air hit me, and I wrinkled my nose. My flashlight illuminated the narrow shaft, metal rungs leading down into what appeared to be a concrete corridor. It didn't look like much, just an old bunker, probably a relic from a time when people feared bombings or worse. But there was something off. I couldn't place it, but the air felt heavier, colder, the silence too perfect. Still, I couldn't turn back now. I climbed down, each rung vibrating slightly under my weight. When my feet touched solid ground, I shone the flashlight around. The corridor was long and featureless, the walls lined with pipes and wires that disappeared into the gloom. A faint hum, barely audible, seemed to emanate from somewhere deeper inside. Then I saw the sign. It was bolted to the wall, just a few feet from the ladder, the white paint chipped and yellowed with age. The bold red letters read, "Rules for Access." Below it, someone had scrawled a list in blocky handwriting. Never enter the bunker after 9 p.m. Do not open the third door on the left. If you hear knocking, do not respond. Always carry the flashlight from the entrance panel. Do not touch the exposed cables. I read the list twice, each rule more bizarre than the last. They didn't make sense. Why would a bunker need rules like these? Was it a prank? A leftover joke from whoever had built the place? The flashlight flickered in my hand, and I glanced back at the ladder. I could still leave. I could close the hatch and pretend I hadn't found anything. But the hum in the air and the unexplored corridor ahead pulled at me. Against my better judgment, I stepped forward. The sound of the hatch closing echoed through the bunker like a distant gong, sealing me inside. The corridor stretched endlessly ahead, its walls covered in peeling gray paint. My footsteps echoed unnervingly, each step a reminder of how alone I was. The hum in the air had grown faint, replaced by a stillness that felt unnatural. It wasn't the peaceful kind of silence you'd expect in an abandoned place. It was too sharp, too heavy, like the bunker was holding its breath. I kept moving, my flashlight sweeping over the walls and floor. The rules from the sign replayed in my mind, but they seemed more like an oddity than anything serious. Don't open the third door on the left. Don't touch the cables. It felt like a leftover relic of someone's paranoia. The first door I passed was slightly ajar. Its hinges groaned as I pushed it open, revealing a small room filled with old equipment. Radios, monitors, and wires spilled across a desk like a frozen snapshot from another time. I ran my fingers over the dials and buttons, their surfaces coated with dust. Everything looked ancient, but functional. On the wall, a map of the bunker's layout caught my eye. It was larger than I'd expected. The map showed several corridors branching out like veins, each one labeled with room numbers and cryptic descriptions. Storage, control, archives, containment. That last word made me pause, my stomach tightening slightly. I took a picture of the map with my phone before leaving the room. The corridor ahead loomed darker, as though the flashlight's beam was being swallowed by the shadows. I passed a second door, this one locked, and continued toward the third. Then I stopped. The third door on the left was closed tight, its surface painted a dull green that had chipped around the edges. A small plaque above the handle read, "Room 03. It didn't look different from the others, but something about it made my skin crawl. The rule flashed in my mind. Do not open the third door on the left. My hand twitched toward the handle, curiosity tugging at me. What could be behind it? The door didn't seem special. No locks, no warnings. And yet, my pulse quickened just standing there. The air around the door felt colder, sharper, as though something on the other side was waiting. I stepped back, forcing myself to keep walking. The corridor turned a corner, leading to a larger space that appeared to be a central hub. A desk sat in the middle, its surface cluttered with papers and a single, weathered flashlight. It looked newer than the rest of the equipment, its casing scratched but clean. Always carry the flashlight from the entrance panel, the rule had said. Was this the one? I swapped my flashlight for the new one, its beam sharper and brighter. As I turned to leave, a sound stopped me in my tracks. Faint knocking. It came from somewhere back down the corridor, soft but deliberate, like knuckles rapping against a metal door. The third door. My breath caught as the knocking grew louder, echoing through the bunker. I gripped the flashlight tighter, the rule screaming in my mind, "If you hear knocking, do not respond." The sound stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was worse, oppressive and unnatural, like the bunker was watching, waiting. I stepped back toward the central hub, my heart pounding in my chest. Whatever was behind that door, I knew one thing for certain. It wasn't friendly. The hum in the air returned, louder now, resonating in my ears. I glanced at the map on my phone, my eyes darting to the section labeled Control. If there were answers to what was going on here, they'd be there. I just hoped I wouldn't have to pass room 03 again to find them. The hum grew louder as I moved through the bunker, not just a sound, but something I could feel. A vibration in the walls, the floor, even in my chest. My new flashlight's beam cut through the oppressive darkness, revealing more peeling paint, exposed pipes, and cables snaking along the ceiling. The knocking from room 03 had stopped, but its echo lingered in my mind like a bad memory. The control room wasn't far, according to the map. I took careful steps, my shoes scuffing against the concrete floor. The corridor felt narrower, the air heavier, as though the bunker itself was closing in. The rules pulsed in my thoughts, each one suddenly feeling more urgent than before. I passed a junction and nearly missed it. The cable. It was dangling from the ceiling, frayed and exposed, sparking faintly as it swayed in the still air. The rule was clear. Do not touch the exposed cables. My heart raced as I approached it, the faint sparks lighting up the corridor like fireflies. The cable hung low, forcing me to duck beneath it. As I passed, I could swear the hum in the air grew sharper, almost disapproving. When I turned the next corner, I found the control room door. It was heavy and metallic, slightly ajar. The flashlight's beam revealed a dimly lit room beyond, filled with consoles, monitors, and buttons that blinked with faint, rhythmic lights. I stepped inside cautiously, the smell of stale air and dust hitting me like a wave. The room was eerily intact, as though it had been frozen in time. A desk sat in the center, its surface cluttered with papers and what looked like a journal. I moved toward it, my eyes scanning the monitors. Most of them were black, but a few flickered faintly, displaying static or illegible text. On the desk, the journal caught my attention first. Its cover was cracked leather, the edges worn from years of handling. I opened it carefully, the yellowed pages filled with tight, frantic handwriting. The rules are not suggestions. Break them at your own peril. The words jumped off the page, the ink bold and angry. Flipping through the journal, I found scattered notes, diagrams, and lists. One entry caught my eye, underlined repeatedly. The knocking is a test. It's waiting for you to respond. If you do, it knows you're there. My stomach twisted. The knocking wasn't random. It was deliberate, a trap. I thought of room 3, the sound of knuckles rapping against the metal door, and felt a chill crawl up my spine. Whoever had written this journal had been in the bunker long enough to learn its secrets, and they hadn't left. The next page was worse. Do not stay past 9 p.m. The bunker resets at night, and if you're inside when it does, you're part of it. I glanced at my watch. 8:12 p.m. My pulse quickened. That gave me less than an hour to figure out what was happening and get out. The hum in the air shifted, louder and deeper now, vibrating through the walls. A monitor flickered, displaying a single line of text. Leave. I backed away from the desk, my hands trembling. The bunker wasn't just abandoned. It was alive, reacting to me. The rules weren't just for safety, they were survival instructions. The hum grew into a low rumble, and I heard it again. Knocking. This time, it wasn't coming from room 03. It was closer, echoing from the corridor I'd just come through. The journal's warning burned in my mind. If you hear knocking, do not respond. I turned off the flashlight, plunging myself into darkness, and waited. The knocking grew louder, more insistent, like it was daring me to break the rule. I clutched the journal tightly, my breath shallow and controlled, as the sound moved past the door. Something was out there, something that knew I was here. When the knocking faded, I turned the flashlight back on and flipped to the final page of the journal. There, scrawled in uneven handwriting, was one last warning. They are watching. If you break too many rules, you won't leave. The realization hit me like a blow to the chest. The rules weren't just about survival, they were about control. Something in this bunker thrived on order, and if I upset the balance, I'd pay the price. I looked at my watch again. 8:27 p.m. I had 33 minutes to get out. The journal's final warning was burned into my mind. They are watching. If you break too many rules, you won't leave. My watch read 8:27 p.m. I had barely half an hour to escape the bunker before whatever reset it underwent would trap me forever. The air seemed heavier, the hum in the walls louder, like the bunker was aware of my dwindling time. I pocketed the journal, grabbed the flashlight, and headed back into the corridor. The knocking had stopped, but the silence that replaced it felt alive, charged with something I couldn't explain. I retraced my steps carefully, the beam of light cutting through the oppressive darkness. My goal was simple: get to the ladder and climb out before it was too late. But when I reached the junction where I'd passed the exposed cable earlier, I froze. The cable was no longer sparking. Instead, it hung completely still, its frayed end pointing downward like an accusing finger. The hum in the air shifted, almost as if it was mocking me. Something had changed. I stepped forward cautiously, ducking beneath the cable. My flashlight flickered, the beam dimming for a moment before returning to full strength. The silence pressed down on me like a weight, and I realized I couldn't hear my own footsteps anymore. The sound of my boots on the concrete was completely swallowed by the bunker. I turned a corner, and my heart stopped. Room 3 was open. The door, which had been firmly shut before, now stood ajar, revealing nothing but impenetrable darkness beyond. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. The rule flashed in my mind: "Do not open the third door on the left." I hadn't opened it, but someone, or something, had. The hum grew louder, and then I heard it. A faint, wet sound, like something dragging across the floor. It came from inside room 03, growing louder with each passing second. My legs finally obeyed, and I stumbled backward, the flashlight shaking in my hand. As I turned to run, the hum turned into a deafening roar. The walls seemed to vibrate, and a sudden rush of air blasted through the corridor, almost knocking me off my feet. From the corner of my eye, I saw something emerge from room 03, a shape, amorphous and wrong, like it didn't belong in this world. It moved too fast, a blur of shadow and noise, and the air around it warped as though it was bending reality itself. I sprinted toward the ladder, my breath ragged and my legs trembling. The roar followed me, a guttural sound that resonated deep in my chest. My flashlight flickered again, the beam dimming to almost nothing. I didn't dare look back. When I reached the ladder, I grabbed the rungs and began to climb, my palms slick with sweat. The roar grew louder, and I felt a cold wind rushing up the shaft, as though the bunker was trying to pull me back down. My arms ached, but I climbed faster, each movement driven by sheer terror. Then, just as I reached the top, the hum stopped. The silence was so sudden, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the world. I pulled myself through the hatch, collapsing onto the forest floor. My chest heaved as I gulped in fresh air, the cool night breeze a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of the bunker. I looked down into the open hatch. The darkness below seemed alive, writhing and pulsating as though it were a living thing. Then, with a final rush of air, the hatch slammed shut, the metallic clang echoing through the forest. My watch read 8:59 p.m. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the stars above and clutching the journal to my chest. I had escaped, but the weight of the rules and the thing in room 03 stayed with me. The bunker wasn't just a relic, it was a prison, and I had come dangerously close to being its newest inmate. But the worst realization came as I stood to leave. In the distance, faint and rhythmic, I could hear knocking, not from the bunker, but from somewhere deeper in the forest. The knocking echoed faintly through the forest, rhythmic and deliberate, as though it was following me. My instinct screamed to run, to put as much distance between me and the bunker as possible, but my legs refused to move. I stood there, staring at the hatch, my mind racing. The journal was still in my hand, its weight feeling heavier than it should. The final warning flashed in my mind. They are watching. If you break too many rules, you won't leave. I had escaped the bunker, but something told me I wasn't free. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. I scanned the tree line, my flashlight slicing through the darkness. The forest was unnervingly still, the usual nighttime sounds absent. The only thing I could hear was the knocking. Then I saw it. A shadowy figure stood just beyond the trees, barely visible in the dim light. It was tall and featureless, its form flickering like static on an old TV screen. My breath caught as it took a step forward, the knocking growing louder with each movement. I stumbled back, the journal slipping from my grip and landing on the forest floor. The pages fanned open, revealing a passage I hadn't noticed before. The words were scrawled in frantic handwriting, barely legible in the dim light. If the knocking follows you, you must make a choice. Return to the bunker or lead it elsewhere. There is no escape. A cold wave of dread washed over me. Led it elsewhere? What did that even mean? The thought of returning to the bunker was unbearable, but the alternative sounded worse. I had no idea what elsewhere meant or what would happen if I chose it. The figure took another stop, and I felt the ground tremble beneath my feet. The knocking seemed to vibrate through my chest, each beat aligning with the pounding of my heart. My flashlight flickered, the beam dimming until it was almost useless. The journal's words echoed in my mind. There is no escape. I picked up the journal, clutching it tightly as I made my decision. I turned and ran, the flashlight barely illuminating the path ahead. My only thought was to get back to the bunker, to shut the hatch and trap whatever this thing was before it could follow me any further. The knocking followed, relentless and growing louder. My lungs burned as I sprinted through the forest, my legs threatening to give out with every step. The bunker's hatch came into view, a dark smudge against the forest floor. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the handle and yanked the hatch open, the metallic groan reverberating through the night. The knocking was deafening now, as though the figure was right behind me. Without thinking, I jumped down the ladder, landing hard on the concrete floor below. The bunker's hum returned instantly, louder and more oppressive than before. The walls seemed to vibrate with energy, and the lights flickered erratically. I climbed back up the ladder and slammed the hatch shut, twisting the handle until it locked in place. Silence. For a moment, I thought it was over. The knocking had stopped, and the air in the bunker was still. But as I turned to face the corridor, I realized my mistake. The hum was louder than ever, and the walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. The bunker wasn't just a prison, it was alive, and I had just brought something back inside. The rules flashed in my mind, a desperate mantra. Do not stay past 9 p.m. Do not open the third door. Do not respond to the knocking. I had broken almost all of them. There was no way out now. The lights flickered again, and I heard it. The knocking, now coming from every direction. The knocking reverberated through the bunker, no longer confined to a single door or corridor. It was everywhere. On the walls, the ceiling, even the floor beneath my feet. The hum, once a faint vibration, now roared like a heartbeat, pulsing through the air with an almost sentient rhythm. I stumbled down the corridor, gripping the journal like a lifeline. The rules raced through my mind, but they felt meaningless now. I had broken too many. The bunker wasn't protecting me anymore. It was pulling me deeper into its grasp. The flashlight flickered, its beam barely cutting through the suffocating darkness. Every shadow seemed alive, writhing and stretching as if reaching for me. My steps slowed as the corridor warped around me, the walls shifting like liquid. It felt like the bunker was changing, reshaping itself to trap me. Then, the voice came. Why did you return? It wasn't a voice I recognized, but it felt familiar, like it had been waiting for me. The words echoed from every direction, layered with a static hum that made my ears ache. You broke the rules, it continued, the tone neither angry nor kind. You belong to us now. I turned a corner and froze. Room 3 was open again, its door yawning wide to reveal nothing but an endless void. The cold air spilling from inside wrapped around me, pulling at my clothes, dragging me closer. The flashlight beam disappeared into the darkness, swallowed whole. The journal slipped from my fingers and fell to the floor, its pages fluttering open. A single phrase caught my eye, scrawled in jagged letters. There is no escape, but there is balance. Balance. The word stuck in my mind, a lifeline in the chaos. The bunker wasn't just a prison, it was a machine, designed to contain something ancient and powerful. The rules weren't arbitrary, they were the mechanism that kept the balance in place. And I had broken it. The voice returned, sharper now. You must choose. Choose? The journal's warnings flashed in my mind. Return to the bunker, or lead it elsewhere. I was back in the bunker, but the balance was still broken. Something had to be done. I looked at room 03, its endless void calling to me. The hum in the air grew louder, vibrating through my bones. My watch read 9:02 p.m. The bunker had reset, and I was still inside. I stepped toward the open door, the void pulling at me with a gravitational force. The knocking stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. It wasn't fear that guided me now. It was understanding. The bunker needed balance, and I was the price. With one final breath, I stepped into the darkness. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the bunker anymore. I stood in the forest, the hatch sealed behind me, the air calm and still. My watch read 8:59 p.m., as though the last hour had never happened. But the bunker was different now. The hum was gone, and the rules, once etched into my mind, felt distant and faint. I turned to leave, but as I walked through the forest, a single sound followed me. Knocking.